Welcome to Important Not Important. My name is Quinn, and this is Science for People Who Give a Shit. We give you the tools you need to fight for a better future for everyone. The context straight from the smartest folks on Earth, and the action steps you can take to support them. Our guests are journalists, scientists, doctors, nurses, engineers, policymakers, activists, founders, astronauts. We even had a reverend once. A few friendly reminders: you can send questions, thoughts, and feedback to us on Twitter at importantnotimp, or you can email us at questions@importantnotimportant.com. If you're among the millions looking for impactful, meaningful work right now, you can head over to importantjobs.com, where we curate open roles on the front lines of the future, as we call it. You could join a team working in clean energy production, journalism, pediatric cancer research, sustainable food, and more. If you represent a company, you can also post your open roles at importantjobs.com and get them in front of the rest of our amazing community. Finally, you can join tens of thousands of other smart people and subscribe to our free weekly newsletter at importantnotimportant.com. Curated science news, analysis, and action steps to help you feel better, but also move the needle on progress. And all of that in 10 minutes or less. Folks, this week's episode will help you understand how accountability works and doesn't work in the climate movement, how you can get involved, and how the very best in the world are doing it. And I'm so pleased to have two of those with us today. Our guests are Annaïse Heglar and Amy Westervelt. Together, they form Hot Take, the podcast and newsletter, and somewhat apart, occasionally, they are some of the most thoughtful, empathetic voices in the climate justice movement, and Amy is among our most groundbreaking investigative journalists, both in print and with her podcast empire, most notably Drilled, which I can't recommend enough. We'll talk about that today. I am so thankful to each of these women, to both of them together, for what they do and for sharing their time and energy and lessons with me today. I learned a lot, and I know you will too. Thanks so much. My guests today are Annaïse Heglar and Amy Westervelt, and together we're going to talk about the empire that they have built together and what you can do to support them. And we're also going to talk a little bit today about keeping the world and institutions and each other accountable. Mary and Amy, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. If you could, if you don't mind, tell me real quick who you are and what you folks do.
So one thing you'll learn about me and Amy is we're terrible at talking about ourselves. So I think we should do this a different way. I'll tell you about Amy, and Amy can tell you about me.
I mean, to be clear, you're in charge at this point. No, the rest of it matters.
So Amy Westervelt is a brilliant podcaster. She's built the most successful climate podcast there is in Drilled. Also a longtime investigative journalist and constant exposer of the fossil fuel industry, and a deep believer in exposing the root causes of a problem before you start talking about solutions. And I guess, Amy, you can tell him who I am.
Yes. Okay. Mary Heglar basically invented climate essays. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, I think Annaïse Heglar is
not far off.
Climate justice essayist, and honestly, as someone who has written about climate for a long time, is probably the person that got more people publishing climate justice stuff, period, in the last few years. If you haven't read her stuff, you should correct that. Just Google her. and yeah, she is the person I know I always turn to for good insight into the ways that climate and race intersect, and that climate sort of provides this lens on every other justice issue and acts as sort of a threat multiplier on all of it.
Yeah. And
I'm sorry. Did you mean climate's a threat multiplier or Mary's a threat multiplier?
Definitely both.
Yeah. Check.
And we together are the co-creators and co-hosts of the Hot Take newsletter and podcast. The podcast came first. Amy and I started talking about doing a podcast together shortly after we met. And Amy was like, what if we did a news podcast together? And I was like, what if it was news criticism? And honestly, our thinking behind it is that you always hear that the biggest barrier to climate action is political will. And how do you build political will? You build it through the discourse. You can't get people riled up about something they don't understand. And you can't get people to understand something if you can't talk about it, right? So part of what we wanted to do was like normalize the conversation around climate change. We wanted to do it in a way that was fun, where we were having fun, because we were both already really busy by the time we took on Hot Take. And we're like, if this isn't fun, I'm not going to do it. Like, I'm already exhausted. It needs to be kind of an outlet. And so we made it kind of like the outgrowth of what we were texting about anyway, which was basically how is climate being covered in the news media? Because that was just something that we would bitch about all the time with each other. And we're like, oh, we could talk about this forever. And it would be. And then the newsletter was also Amy's idea. It came out. I'll let her talk about that part of it.
Well, I mean, we had decided to take a pause on the podcast, but we didn't want to just not be talking about climate coverage. And we wanted to see if we could, raise money to pay for podcast production, because it's freaking expensive, as you know, Quinn, as you know. There were all these great climate newsletters out there, but there wasn't anything that was doing the one thing that Mary and I were looking for, which was kind of curating all of the great climate stories from the week. So it was sort of, you'd see newsletters from one particular publication that combined all of their stories from the week, or you'd see newsletters from one person writing about stuff, but nothing that was like, okay, here's everything you should read this week. So that was sort of the idea that we had for the Hot Take newsletter. And then we quickly found that it could be someplace that we could write literally our hot takes on what was happening in the climate space that week too. So that's been great, I think, right? Yeah. Mary, for us, is like, we're like, oh, I want to talk about this and I want to talk about that. Mm-hmm. And So anyway.
Yeah. And we don't have time to like do a podcast for every single little thing that we want to say. Like, we're just realizing we had so much to say about this. And like another thing is like going back to why we started this whole endeavor to begin with, this kind of people would criticize scientists for not communicating well enough about climate change, right? Like one of the biggest questions I got all the time whenever I did panels was, what do the scientists need to do to like convince people that this is a problem or convince people to take action on it? And it was like, it's not the scientist's job. It's the media's job to educate the public, actually. And who's watchdogging the media? And nobody was doing that. And so we're like, you know what? We'll do it.
Yes.
Rock and roll. I love it. I love the newsletter. I love everything in your empire and all Mary's essays and all of it. So I'm thankful for it. And I'm glad to expose our community to it a little more today.
To be talking to your audience.
Well, give it time. Give it time. So, folks, we like to start with one important question. The answer usually begins with the guest cackling at me, but then we actually end up getting something thoughtful. So understand that it's somewhat tongue in cheek, but it is fun because I do encourage you to be bold and honest. So either of you can start, but nothing extensive. Why are you vital to the survival of the species?
Amy, you laugh first, so you have to answer first.
I mean, I don't know. I struggle with this because I am very much opposed to the idea that any one person is vital. I think that I am a useful part of a whole, but like, I would like to think that if I wasn't here, someone else would be doing, this work too. And I don't just say that to be sort of like modest or whatever. It's more just that I actually think like it puts so much pressure on each individual to be like, only you can do this thing versus sort of we're all members of a choir and sometimes we have solos and like sometimes we need to just like fade into the background for a minute and that's okay too.
Sure.
So yeah, but I do feel like I have a somewhat unique set of skills when it comes to digging up dirt on oil executives. So that's fun.
For sure. We'll take it.
I love tapping into Amy's skills for that. Just like see something, like I'll have a suspicion. I'll be like, Amy, what? I suspect that fossil fuel companies have been funding the police, and then she'll go dig it up and like, oh, it was right.
Awesome.
I agree with Amy's answer. I don't think I am vital to the survival of the human species. I don't think any one person is. Like that would be really problematic if any one person were.
For sure.
I think that, I mean, I don't know. I've tried to do something with the gifts of emotional intelligence and the gifts of like, you know, I will say that like what I think I bring to the climate movement is one, a perspective as a person of color and one who, you know, is going to be vocal whether people like it or not. I think that's something that's really been for way too long absent is voices of people of color in the climate movement and also voices of artists. Like, I think a lot of people think I'm a journalist. Some people think I'm a scientist. They are very wrong. But I think the point of artists is that they have a lot of intuition and can kind of see or feel things coming. And I think that's what I bring to this conversation.
I love it. See, we usually get somewhere. It's a preposterous question, but now I've asked it from like 120 people. So it's interesting to hear. If people are like really on it, they're like, oh, fuck yeah, I'm vital. Then I've got serious questions. So it's definitely better when people start with
why are you
that's
vital,
not me.
Quinn?
My job in life is to get my wife's heart beating by bringing her coffee in the morning. And then she can accomplish all of the amazing things that she does every single day. So if that's the thing that I do, it's very good. I want to talk about accountability, whether it's by way of art or journalism. And also because accountability is not something the U.S. does a lot of. Yeah. Really? Yeah. Whether it's reparations or cigarettes or prisons or housing or COVID or fossil fuels, we don't do a lot of that. But that doesn't mean there isn't a yearning for it in a lot of ways and opportunities to exact it. And journalism has traditionally led the way, but media, as we know, has also been a clusterfuck at times, if not equally egregious, especially when it comes to things like fossil fuels. I mean, the Washington Post probably today ran a feature sponsored by fucking Exxon. So we know that, you know, journalism is not here to specifically offer hope, and that just having knowledge doesn't get the job done or manifest itself in systemic action. Community organizing does that, but having the information helps. And with regard to things like climate accountability, nobody's really done more than drilled and led the way on that stuff. You've spent years and 5 seasons now.
We're just about to put the 6th season out in a couple weeks, actually.
Hell yeah. Awesome. I mean, no one has done more to document the greedy bastards in institutions and systems behind climate denial and obstructionism. And I mean, we saw, I unearthed what happened this week with Exxon wasn't really journalism. It was more activism probably because it broke a lot of the rules.
You know what? I made that comment on Twitter and the guys who did it were like, actually, we're journalists and we're allowed to do this kind of thing in the UK. And I was like, my bad. I'm sorry.
Oh, shit.
If I did that, I would be sued to hell and back and I would lose because the US, for all of our talk about free speech, does not allow undercover journalism.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. But it's amazing. That
in this case, the means got it done. But look, I mean, clearly, like literally verbatim what this guy said, and everything you have covered, right? It comes back to money and greed and shifting these power structures. And now we've got these we just ran an episode with the guys from Clean Creatives.
Oh, awesome.
And you've got,
I know them.
Oh yeah, they're with Jarrell and Jamie. They're fucking great. And you've got activism groups, you got Science Moms, Dr. Hey-Ho's out there, and all these other folks. We don't have to convince people it's real anymore. Right? We know that it's real. We know a bunch of people lied to protect power and profits. You've got season 6 coming out. But what's next for you, knowing that, I mean, looking around this week, like we're in a different era of doing this thing because there's just people who aren't going to be convinced anymore. And that's fine. And frankly, we don't have the time to deal with those folks.
Right.
So it is shifting the power structures, and we don't need to. I mean, we should always expose these people, but what is the next logical step for you in your empire that you've built, doing what you do?
Well, I can tell you what our practical next steps are, which are I'm working on 2 new shows. One is around disinformation and sort of how it came about and how to spot it to sort of hopefully disempower it a bit. And I'm dragging Mary into that project a bit too. And then the other one is a kind of a drilled spinoff that's following all of the climate litigation, because there's actually almost 300 climate cases active all over the world right now. And, they're having varying degrees of success. Some of them have been quite successful recently. And what I've been noticing is that the way that media is set up to cover court cases doesn't really lend itself to covering these stories. So it's like, usually a case gets covered when it's filed and when it's resolved. And you don't get any of the backstory of like why it was filed, And in this case, or like what the legal strategy was and what worked and what didn't and whatever. And so, yeah, we're hoping that this not only kind of shows people the current impact and like what is driving these cases, but also gives people a sense of like, oh, this is something maybe I could do. Maybe I could pull together a case about this and take these guys to court. And also even for the attorneys working on these cases, like a lot of them don't know what other attorneys are working on, So being able to sort of help connect all of them to each other's work, I think feels helpful now too. And then after the 6th season of Drilled is really looking at the natural gas industry, or excuse me, the fossil gas industry. But then after that, I want to do something that Mary and I have been talking about a bunch, which is looking at the what I think is the most critical decade on climate, which is 95 to 2005, and sort of understanding really well what happened there, because we're at kind of the same moment again. We have almost the exact same number of people who think we need to act on climate change, feel very strongly that, we need to do something. We have politicians willing to do something. We have media coverage. We have companies saying that they want to do something. All of that in almost exactly the same numbers that we had going into Kyoto in 97. And we still have a very poor understanding of what the hell happened there. That like the U.S. had signed on to a binding international treaty requiring emissions reductions in 1997. Right. And what the fuck happened? How did we lose 30 years? We don't have the luxury of those 30 years anymore. We don't have the luxury of even 3 years anymore. So we really need to understand how that happened and how to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
I love that. I had 3 quick takeaways. One is that apparently 1997 is almost 30 years ago, which I'm just going to go jump out a fucking window.
I know. I feel old. Yeah.
Holy shit. I was like, what is she talking about? And then I did the math and now I'm very sad.
Yeah.
2, it's like, man, I mean, you're right. I mean, that is some serious sliding door shit, right?
Yeah.
Like what could have bbeen? And all you ever hear is like, well, we didn't do it and Kyoto was imperfect anyways. And it's like, that can't be the whole story, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you have sort of like a ramp up of climate denial. Kyoto happens, then it gets tanked. George Bush gets elected, and then we go to war with Iraq. Like there's this very crazy timeline that's like, Jesus. And like there's still, just a lot of dots that haven't been connected. So that's the next big project.
I love that. I'm here for it. You guys are, especially Mary, you're meme professionals. And I saw one from someone today that, and I'll put it in the show notes. You know the one with the dominoes. There's the guy setting up the little domino, and then there's the big domino at the end. And the little domino was a like poorly designed Chad in Florida in 1999, and the big domino was 3 severe weather alerts in New York City yesterday, and you're just like, oh man, that's fuck. Okay. Yeah,
I'll say I don't really do most of the memes. I do some of them, but like when it gets into Photoshop, that's Amy. She's more technologically savvy than me.
That's a lot of work. I still haven't figured out like how do I do it.
Yeah.
Like it's a whole thing. I'd rather just yell at people.
Yeah,
much easier, much more my style.
Well, that all sounds incredible, and I'm here for it. Like the more we can hold these people's feet to the flames, we should do that. Mary, I feel like you shortchange yourself by saying you don't do the memes, at least, because your essays do mean a lot to so many folks. I want to talk about how you focus so much somehow, probably just being a good human being, but the ability to focus that and come from constantly from this place of love and empathy. And you've written about and talked about carving a specific place for yourself, and specifically for, among others, I believe it was your nephew. So you can show him this world that we're dealing with and that we're all fighting for. And it reminded me of, and I talk about this all the time, so I think my listeners are probably sick of it, but I just don't care. Former podcast and Boston Globe opinions editor Bina Venkatarman wrote a book, Optimist Telescope.
She's a friend of ours.
And that book. Yeah.
She's the greatest.
Yeah.
And there is one quote from it where she talks about being a better ancestor.
Yeah.
And that has stuck with me ever since, because it is one of those things that just everything else kind of falls away and can really help you focus. And you can apply it in any number of ways depending on who you are, right? For me, a cis white guy with enormous privilege, born in 20th century America, right, with the world's most supportive wife, as discussed, and I've got clean air and water and food, right? The least I can do is be a better ancestor than my fucking previous ones. The least I can do is like host a fucking podcast, right? To be an activist and try to tear down these systems that I have benefited from. But as a mom, it's even harder, right? Because Amy, like you wrote about, I have to make this choice every day. Do I hang out with my kids or do I do journalism work that benefits other kids? But
Right.
a lot of folks don't have kids by choice or necessity, or they're focused on other kids like a nephew or kids in India or Latin America where it's hot and dry all the fucking time. And so those folks are using that quote to make decisions for the long term on a global scale, right? And obviously indigenous populations have used this kind of thinking forever. It focuses you, right? Having a child or a creed or a talisman. How does that still focus your day-to-day work and help you produce these essays that, again, like move people?
I really struggle, or like I tense up when I hear this idea that like a child focuses you, because I think that like horrible people have kids every day. You know, like
True.
Rex Tillerson has kids. Donald Rumsfeld had kids.
Sure.
Donald Trump has kids. Like that doesn't necessarily follow for me. But so I like, and I think that this is a piece of rhetoric that comes up a lot in climate. Is like, I do this for my kids. It's for my kids. It's for my kids. And it's like that's other people think they're building wealth for their kids, right? Like that's not. And also, some people are just terrible parents. So like I
whoa.
Amy,
we're
you gotta get
right
your shit together, Amy. All right. We talked about this before. But no, Amy's a great mother. But I've definitely seen raggedy bitches have kids every day. So
Oh yeah.
So I guess like maybe I'm getting caught up in that. And yeah, I do want to be a good aunt. I do want to be a good ancestor, but I also think I had good ancestors, right? Like when I think of my ancestors, I'm thinking of Fannie Lou Hamer and Martin Luther King and James Baldwin, and they were good ancestors. So I'm trying to basically prove myself worthy of the legacy in the world that they tried to give to me. So that's who I'm holding myself more accountable to, is the people who fought for me. It's like more like I'm fighting to be deserving of what they gave me. And so that's more of what I'm thinking about. And like how it guides my writing and how I show up in climate is like, I don't have a choice but to show up. I don't have a choice but to do this.
I love that because I think you're right. I mean, we see it all the time. Anytime young woman goes through some sort of abuse, right? Or whatever it might be, or we're talking about abortion or healthcare in Congress. It's always the white men lawyers who are the politicians are going like, I'm doing this for my daughters. And it's like, well, you should just fucking do it. Like, forget doing it for your daughters. Like, that's it. So I totally get why the archetype is abused and why you would cringe at that for sure. I guess for me, it's just like, how is that personalized for you? And I think that makes a lot of sense where you're like, well, I'm also looking in the other direction, which is like, I have to own up to this and I have to do this because the people before me did, and I can't be the one who stops the fight, essentially.
Right. I think I also kind of think back to, when you were a kid, you were constantly wondering, what am I going to be like when I grow up? Who am I going to be when I grow up? That's how I was thinking of life. And maybe that just goes to show I read a lot of novels and you're always like, how's this going to end? Where's this going? And now it's like, I am the person I wondered about when I was 12. And I want that little girl to be proud of me.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I love that.
Yeah. She's still struggling, but yeah.
I'm with you. Amy, what about you? I mean, you talk about like the pure logistics of, and I was rereading both of your essays in All We Can Save, my favorite book. And, you've always been so honest about, quite literally the logistics of like, I'm supposed to be, society and myself thinks I should be hanging out with my kids right now, but also I have a fucking job to do, which pays for my kids, but also helps other kids.
Right.
Are you able to not channel it, but I'm guessing like, how does that actually like practically apply itself in your work when you're going after, again, like the mechanics behind what happened from 1995 to 2005, does that influence you in some way? Because that's looking back in a way too.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I love what you said, Mary, because I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because I think it's good to think about the fact that ancestor doesn't just mean from here forward, but also like what came before us and all of that stuff. But I think honestly, I feel like the thing that drives me most is just like a deep sense of unfairness in general, like across the board. I like if I see things that are rigged or unfair, it just like, it pisses me off and it like makes me want to fight to right that wrong. And I do have this sense, and just in terms of thinking about like longevity or whatever, I feel like I have this sense that, even if it doesn't happen in my lifetime, I feel compelled to lay the groundwork for things to change because it's the right thing to do, and I do look at like my kids and I feel terrible. Like when they talk about doing stuff that I've done that I'm not sure they'll be able to do, it's very depressing, Yeah. And then I think that just like fuels the righteous indignation and anger that much more,
Right. It's also for Amy and I, we're both very petty.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'm like, I want revenge.
But that shit is important.
It really
right?
is. It's kind of like, you're not going to push me into an early grave and then walk off without so much as a black eye. Like that's just
right.
not
Sure.
right. I'm kicking you in the nuts. It's happening. So
that's right.
I have a friend who, through no, he will admit, through no effort of his own, has come into a lot of family money, and he's trying to figure out, how does he do good in the world with this thing? And
can you give it to me?
I know. Well, literally the thing I told him is I was like, I will be your like vigilante. Like I will do whatever the thing is to just burn it down. I'm happy to use that money.
That's awesome.
In a very practical, very dark way if necessary. Like whatever gets this shit done at this point. Right.
Yes.
But you're right. I mean, look, you joke about the petty thing, but it works. But I love the idea looking backwards. I just gave my kid, I hesitate to like romanticize this stuff, but I was going through some childhood stuff and I found a book about the airplane that my grandfather flew in World War II. And I gave it to my kid and I was like, look, this is like the thing. This is what they did, because you go back to the memes of Buzz Aldrin and the guy saying, we don't land on the moon or whatever. And it's like, you always, the lesson is like you always punch a Nazi, right? And would our generation do that? And it's like my version might be hosting a podcast from Colonial Williamsburg, but it's like if he's going to get in that fucking plane over the Pacific, which was a nightmare, what am I up to doing here? I appreciate you guys sticking with me on that one. It's the extended version of like, why do you do what you do every day? The big question I get all the time, and I'm sure you guys get a lot, is what can I do? And when I respond to them, like, what can you do? Like, what are your fucking skills? What were you into in 7th grade science, or what has recently affected you or your family or whatever? It's not just practically like, oh, I'm a graphic designer, I can make memes or signs or whatever. It's also like, why do you give a shit besides this thing is scary? Like who in your life makes you want to do these things? And that can be different for a lot of people.
I was just going to say, like, I think it also shifts around a lot, like some weeks it's like I'm thinking about my kids. Some weeks I'm thinking about the past. Some weeks I'm fueled by spite and like just want to dunk on oil execs,
Sure.
And like some weeks I'm really like sad or whatever. It's like, I think actually I'm writing about this for this weekend's newsletter. I feel like a part of climate adaptation that we don't talk about is like the need for people to adapt to the total constant roller coaster that is living through this time period, and like being okay with that like you're not going to have a consistent feeling about it. And sometimes you're going to feel like the stuff that you're doing doesn't fucking matter. And like, you should take a break then, Yeah.
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 Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I think that there are vested interests in us being confused about what we can do and what we can bring to climate, right? Like for a very long time, it was the baseline understanding was like, if you're not an economist, if you're not a scientist, if you're not someone with an advanced degree, you can't engage on this. And you're just at the mercy of, these experts or whatever. Yeah. And like, if they can't get the story across, then sorry, kid, you're going to roast. Right. And so I think understanding that like your confusion about what you can do and what is actually going on is by design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, that helps you, like, first of all, feel less stupid, right? Like, I think a lot of people just don't want to get engaged with it because they feel like powerless, they feel meaningless, and they also feel just kind of dumb because they don't understand what's happening. Sure. But there's decades of propaganda that has gone into making sure you don't understand what's going on and making sure that you feel powerless. Right. So, like, it's not your fault that you feel that.
Sure.
Right. So I think first understanding that, and also the reason I do this is because I believe in throwing rocks at bullies. Yeah. I was bullied as a kid, and like they don't go away until you fight them. There's no like talking around them. There's no finding the right words. There's no, avoiding them and waiting it out and hoping somebody else is going to come save you. You have to fight them. And so that's kind of what I like in climate action too. It's like, what is the other choice? Yeah. Letting somebody beat you up every day?
That's right. That's right.
Like,
sure.
And so I think a lot of people like don't want to get involved because it's like, well, I don't know if we're going to win and it looks pointless. Like, so the fuck what? Right. I don't care if it's pointless. Yeah. I'm getting my licks in no matter what.
Yeah.
So I think one of the themes there is this is hard. No matter what your specific application of your rage and your pettiness and your, desire for revenge or justification, whatever it might be, it is, or you're working on the front lines, or you're Kate Marvel and you're the first one to see this science and you're just sitting there going, oh, fuck. It's hard. And I wanted to just talk briefly about, because it seems like you two have such an awesome work and life relationship, and we can talk about it offline if that's not the case.
No,
I'm happy to host a session.
Oh, I fucking hate Amy. No, Chris, we love each other.
But listen, I thought about this because I'm again not sure how much you guys are familiar. Like, we don't just do climate because there's a lot of other clusterfucks out there, but there's also some other good stuff. So we did a lot of COVID work this year, and I've been thinking about. So I was a religious studies major, right? I'm a liberal arts major, but I'm an atheist. But I took this class called Death in the Afterlife. And it's learning about how folks, for themselves, if they know that it's coming, how they handle death or just in aging. But also on the other side, for everyone who's quote unquote left behind, how how we handle mourning and the practicalities of the end of life in this huge variety of ways, right? And I thought about that because, I mean, COVID is obviously, and climate change are not going to end for a long time.
Right.
But specific to COVID, we just haven't mourned publicly as a nation, as a globe, as a people in mass for these collective losses, but also with this urgent need for the economy to snap back, right? Mm-hmm. No one has really been afforded the time and the grace to handle personal losses in the ways that we're usually accustomed to. Mm. And so losses continue for a huge variety of reasons, but it's become this blur. And again, I was looking at your guys' All We Can Save essays, and Mary, you had this line where you said, "We've entered into an age where these tragedies fade and blend into a continuum that we struggle to recognize as normal." Mm. And like, that's this fucking week, if nothing else. Right? You did write that. Yeah.
It's beautiful. That's beautiful, Mary.
It's heavy, but it's true because like we keep calling these things like, here comes this disaster, or now it's this disaster, but they're just hitting in there all the time. And like you said, there are threat multipliers, and this is normal, but it's going to keep changing, and it's uncomfortable. And even if you're in it, almost sometimes especially if you are in it every day, like you guys or some of these folks who've been doing it forever, there's just an enormous amount of like internal, and sometimes if you're comfortable with it, like external sharing. And I keep thinking like, if this is the way it's going to keep going, we have to find better ways to take care of each other and to be accountable to one another. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, after what you guys have built over the past few years, if you have any lessons to folks who are trying to get in this thing, but are like, fuck, this is just scary. Like, I don't know if I can handle it. Like, what should they seek out? What should they work on? What should they look for?
You absolutely need friends that you can talk about this stuff
Amen.
with. Like you need, like you totally need people that you can be like, oh my God, I'm so depressed this week. And like, that get that. Because I also feel like otherwise, I don't know, there has been this encouragement over the last few years for people to work their shit out in public. And I'm not sure how helpful that is with climate stuff sometimes. Like sometimes it's better to have that conversation with a friend who understands what you're going through, and like that, I don't know, where you can just really be honest about your feelings, good and bad. And you can share stuff without it coming across as like, and this is how you should feel about climate, because I feel like I said, like your feelings shift around, and I think to me, that's the most important thing, like mental health wise, is just like people who also understand the problem and are also grappling with it, that you can talk to.
Yeah. I definitely think community is a big part of it. Honestly, that's where me and Amy's relationship grew out of. Like, I fangirled out on her on Twitter, and then we met in person, and then we became friends. And like we support each other through this. And I think our working relationship has come such that like our depression cycles are linked.
It's true.
Right.
Like we both kind of start to like run out of steam at the same time. You'll notice like we tend to take Twitter breaks at the same time. Like
it's true.
It's very synced up like that. And so I encourage people to find like not just a buddy, but friends, and like build a community and be able to talk about this without having to like apologize for how you feel about it or any of that sort of thing. Like you need to get it out, because when you feel alone, like that grief is meant to be shared. It's not meant to be suffered in isolation. So there's that. I would also say like we need a lot more art. We need a lot more artists. I think that is how people grieve and process through things. And I'm really concerned about us going through COVID and then trying to just go back to life as normal before that, because they kind of tried that with the Spanish flu. And then the next thing you know, you got global fascism and the Great Depression and genocide. It wasn't good. Yeah. Right? Like, let's not do that. And honestly, when I look back to like art around that time, you don't see the Spanish flu reflected. Yeah. And I feel like that is how we process things. That's how we find catharsis is through art and through talking about things and feeling them. And I'm worried that we're not going to do that with COVID. At the same time, I'm not ready to see my favorite shows with masks on.
No.
I'm not ready.
Right.
A little soon. Now, I feel like COVID is a good time to like represent that in art with metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
Climate change, we don't need metaphors anymore. Like we should be able to like just hit this head on.
Yeah.
But I also think that that's why we've seen this explosion in climate podcasts over the past few years, because people are normalizing the conversation. Because before, people just did not know how to talk about it. But if you listen to a podcast about it, you're literally listening in on a conversation about it. You learn how to talk about it.
Yeah. And there's so much more variety now. So it's like you can plug in wherever makes sense for you.
Sure. It's interesting. I mean, you're right. And I don't, for folks who are really new to this, for whatever, if you're listening to this because of Amy and Mary or because you found Archer or whatever it is, I will say it can be hard to find people who even if they might tangentially be into this thing, that can stomach it all the time. And finding those boundaries and those friends are important, but it can be difficult. I have this wonderful therapist I talk to every 2 weeks, and I feel like once a month his FaceTime pops up and I'm like, oh, you're in for it today, buddy. Here, let me tell you about like these 10 fucking things that are going on. But that's also helpful. If you can afford that and you can find something like that, it's hugely helpful to get through these things and to do the work. You talked about how there's so many more podcasts and ways in, and that's because it's happening. This thing is live. If you guys were getting into this today, is there anything you would do differently if you were just getting started? For instance, if you still had energy and life and passion, that you would talk to younger folks about, whether they're getting into journalism or they want to start getting into essays, besides just like open a blog and get going? What have you learned along the way that could help some of these younger folks that are trying to find their way in? The actual practical mechanics of it.
I think like talk to people that are already doing the thing that you want to be doing. That can be very helpful, and like do it in a respectful way. Cause I definitely like, I'm pretty open to talking to any young person that's like, hey, I just want to like learn the ropes or whatever. But, but it drives me nuts when they're sort of like disrespectful of my time, so like ask nicely, and like, a lot of people will actually like talk to you about that stuff, and then I think also finding, again, in the same way as we were talking about like finding your personal pathway into the climate movement, same goes for journalism. Like I spent actually a period of time in my career where I was really focused on like getting published in certain places, or like finding ideas that like those places would buy. And I realized that like that was just ass backwards, that like really I had to figure out what I wanted to write about and was most interested in, and then pursue that. And of course, like then you write better shit and like more people want to publish you.
Sure.
So yeah. And I would say too, like, honestly, if you're looking to get into journalism and you don't find a staff job right off the bat, like get a stable income job that allows you the time and headspace to do some writing on the side, so you can kind of like start building out your portfolio and figuring out what you like to do, what you're good at, and all that kind of stuff.
That is one of the cheat codes to creative, finding your sideways way into creative work, is to get a job that pays the bills, that doesn't require your brain, so that you still have it left for writing at 5 a.m. or at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if you're able to do that, if you have the sort of schedule and lifestyle that like, you're able to do that, then, I do still think that that's a way in. And then, some people have been able to just, like launch a newsletter right out the gate or create a podcast. Like if I don't know, I feel like the podcast space is so crowded now. It's getting harder to break in. But like, when I did Drilled, I was fairly new to audio, and I had this idea, and everybody told me there was no audience for climate podcasts. And I was like really, really convinced that it was a good idea. And I just made it myself. So I do think, like, if you feel really strongly that your creative idea will work and you are able to just sort of like grind it out and do it, I do still think there's value in doing that. But I also have to realize that, like, I think there's a little bit of a generational difference there too, where like I think Gen Xers are more willing to work for free, and I don't actually think that's good.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not sure if that's like, just my age talking or if it's really a good way to go. Yeah.
I guess for me, and I'm speaking to like just any kind of artist, this is going to sound cocky, but I wouldn't have done anything different.
Yeah.
Because I'm just not about the business of like criticizing myself for getting involved in trying to like solve a crime. Like I'm not going to like flog myself for like mistakes on climate action up against like some of the most powerful companies in the world.
For sure.
So there's that. Artists don't create to be noticed. They don't create for money.
Right.
They create because it's who they are.
Sure.
And so just worry about being honest and telling your truth. And there's always only one truth, and it's always yours. So in that sense, you're creating for yourself and you are your first audience. So just make sure that like you are telling the full story in a way that resonates with you, and don't worry about your audience. Worry about you. And worry about, healing yourself and finding the catharsis and just telling the truth, right? Like, I think that there's so much focus in climate communications about like finding the right message or the right words or the right emotion to evoke in people. And there's no right, there's no wrong. There's just the truth. And that's what you should focus on.
We're very big on gatekeepers in this movement, and it can be pretty self-defeating, unfortunately.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I understand that there's people who have been doing it for like 25 years who feel pretty scarred by a lack of inaction and a lack of community on it. And so I can empathize with that a little bit. Like some of the folks are like, these are the 6 things like we have to do and we can't do anything else. And because they've been fighting for those 6 things and we haven't done any of them forever. And now for the first time we have a little money for them. They're like, we got to do these right now. And it's like, yes, of course. But also, solar is now cheaper than ever. And there's all these other things we could possibly do along the way, because the answer is like kitchen sink. Like we got to do the whole thing. But it's the same thing to our tent of people, which is it can't just be these specific people getting things done. We need everyone. And if your brand of art is essays or poems or sculpture or design or speeches or songs, whatever it might be, then we need it.
Yeah, I would also say don't be afraid to like do something different or think completely differently or to do something that hasn't been done, because all of the people who told Amy that there was no audience for a climate podcast hadn't tried to do the podcast that she did. Sure. And also like if they had the answers, if they knew how to fix this problem, it wouldn't still be a problem.
Same with
so like maybe I don't know what they're talking about.
When you started doing essays, right, Mary? Like it wasn't like Mary wrote her first essays on Medium, and then all of a sudden all these editors that like realized, we should assign stuff like this, so it's like sometimes you do have to kind of show people that what you're talking about will work. Yeah.
When I first started writing about climate and emotion, a friend of mine was like, I would say, stop being so lazy.
That's what they said to you?
Yeah.
Wow.
They told me that writing about climate through the lens of emotion was lazy.
Wow.
There's so many ways to unpack that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
They wanted me to like write about like the hard-hitting science. And I was like, I feel like that's actually already out there.
Yeah, there's plenty of that. Oh my God.
Right.
Wow.
What's that person's address and like social security number? I could just.
No, it's just like, well, I guess we'll see who's right.
Wow. Find helpful friends out there, folks. Supportive friends who don't really care what your art is, but just want to support you and your values, and that'll go a long way.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, I did it because I had to.
Yeah.
Like I had to write about climate and emotions because like I needed to do that for myself. So I did it anyway.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think that helps too. For me, I think Mary and I have talked about this too, like having a genuine, like, it's not that I don't care. It's not that like other people's opinions don't influence me or that I can't take in new information and like rethink my stance on things or anything like that. But I do feel like I have this sort of core, like, feeling of like, well, if something feels really important to me, I really don't give a shit what other people think. You know? And like a core giving no fucks thing that is helpful.
Hard-headed.
Yeah.
Stubborn.
Yeah. It's true.
Unfortunately, my 5-year-old is in that phase right now, and his worldview isn't quite as developed to justify that positioning. So if you could just help out a little bit with that, it'd be great.
Yeah.
I know Mary's got to go rescue her cat, so I don't want to take you guys too long. I really appreciate all of your time and everything you guys do. I've a couple of little quick last questions that we ask everybody before we get out of here. When was the first time in your life when you realized you had the power of change or the power to do something meaningful? First moment when you realized you had that power.
I think I'm still waiting on that moment.
I was going to say that too. I was going to say the same.
I don't know that I believe that.
Sure I do. I know. I actually think, again, I mean, I feel like a broken record, but like I actually think that I can tell you the moment when I sort of like let go of searching for that feeling and sort of embraced collectivism instead. And that is actually talking to a like 22-year-old Sunrise person who was like explaining to me how their organization works at the local level, like in their local groups, and how sort of flattened the hierarchy is. And it sounded like I felt this huge sense of relief in myself where I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. Like just being a contributor to a broader thing is like so much more achievable, and also like such a relief that I don't have to like be, an individual change maker. Yeah.
And it's so much more gratifying.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, to be a part of something, whether it's, again, something like Sunrise on the national level or the local level, like you don't have to go sit in Nancy Pelosi's office to be part of something like that, because there are incredible, again, like the Science Moms groups or the Moms Clean Air movement. Like there's just these incredible groups out there that you can be part of, and God, it feels good, not just to identify people who you don't have to explain yourself to.
Yes.
But also it's the threat multiplier, right? But for the good guys.
Like I occasionally get, Mary knows this because I complain to her about it a lot. I occasionally get annoyed when people sort of like parrot my work and don't credit me. But the flip side of that is like, it's fucking awesome that happens. That's great. Sure. Like I want that to happen.
No, please stop doing that. I mean, people, please stop stealing Amy's
But it's
work.
like, but I do, like, I want there to be like tons of people calling out the oil companies and tons of people like, pointing out what they were doing in the 70s versus now or whatever, and like Mary's talked about that with the green trolling stuff too. It's like, she doesn't want to be the only person trolling Chevron on Twitter. She wants other people to like take up that.
No, because then I couldn't take a break.
Like take up that mantle and carry it forward. So yeah, I guess in that way, like we have like done some things to inspire change or get other people to like go in this direction too. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Perfect. This is probably going to be the most ridiculous version of this question because it's you two. Who is someone in your life that's positively impacted your work in the past 6 months?
Oh, I mean,
Amy.
Yeah, Mary.
Great. This has been so fun.
Yeah.
Easy. Yes.
Awesome. What is your self-care? Because I get a lot of folks who are just burnt out. And a lot of them have found their walk in the woods or Netflix or ice cream or kids or working out, whatever it might be. And a lot of them are still really struggling. So not that someone should parrot your self-care, but any ideas, we'll take them all.
Yeah. I mean, I've been kind of taking a break from producing as much stuff and being on social media for a while to focus on self-care for a little while, because I'm just feeling like constantly overwhelmed and just like I've depleted.
Yeah.
And so for me, physical exercise is a big part of that. I've been like, kind of dealing with a running injury and then trying to recover from, and it is not easy. So that's really frustrating. And I just don't feel like myself right now. So for me, self-care looks like a lot of just being patient, which is hard. I am not naturally a patient person. And so I was struggling through a yoga class recently, which is frustrating because yoga used to be like my sanctuary. I used to really enjoy it. It was fun. I look forward to it. But now I'm in a position where like poses that were really hard, were really like, that felt really good to me now feel really, really hard to me. And I had this talk with myself of like, this is going to be hard for a while. And once you accept that something is going to be hard, you don't get as frustrated with the fact that it's hard, if that makes sense, right? And I think that applies to climate change too. This is going to suck. This is supposed to suck. You are not supposed to feel good about this. And once you start accepting that you're not supposed to feel good about it, it becomes like you can actually get to a place where you can start finding pockets of joy and humor and feeling okay about it a little bit, because like you're not supposed to feel great about it. It's like, you know, finding out that you have an illness or something. You're not supposed to be crunk about that. But you're supposed to, you know, deal with it and learn how to cope. And so that's my biggest trick to self-care. And I'm not always good at it. It's just like understanding that you're not always going to feel good.
Expectation setting is just changes everything. Did you guys read, and Amy, just if you could 1 second, did you guys read Eric Holthouse's book? Came out last year, the year before, something like that?
I haven't yet. I started to read it, and I have, honestly, I have like a pile of 20 books on my nightstand
I hear you.
that I'm just going to get to.
I'm the cliche of like ordering new books and while the other ones suffer in the corner. Anyways, Eric has this great, it's basically about like, look, if we do everything we can, this is what the next 30 to 40 years really looks like by decade, sort of. And what's interesting about it is it's a lesson in expectation setting about the practical realities about what are going to happen if we do everything and why we need to do everything, but also how difficult that's going to feel and be. And also, here's how you can find some joy in that, because along the way, we're actually going to build something that's better. We're not just going to get to zero. And that's going to be really amazing. And we've got to identify those wins along the way. And you've got to find ways to celebrate these things and to come together along the way.
Yeah, I loved the idea of that book too, because I do feel like there's a huge need for more imagining of a future that is neither utopia or dystopia, that is just like a new reality. And we don't have a lot of that, you know? So it's hard for people to not go to immediate dystopia because they don't know what like reality looks like, right? They just know what like the worst case scenario looks like. So anyway, I liked that about his take or his approach in that book.
It's very thoughtful. So your self-care, Amy, go for it.
It's so funny because I was going to say something really similar to what Mary said, which is like kind of letting yourself off the hook of being super productive all the time or being like this climate warrior all the time. You know, like it's okay for you to like take a day off. It's okay for you to take even like a month away from climate stuff if you feel like you need that break. You know, like we need people to be whole when they're working on this issue. And like sometimes you just need a break. I do also, like on a very, very practical level, regular social media detoxes, fucking great. Like very highly recommend, you know?
Sure.
I like was off Twitter for a couple weeks and like just went back on and was texting Mary today that I feel like I need to take another like total cleanse because I got sucked back in. And it's just very negative and it can be very overwhelming. And I don't miss it. After like a day of being off of all platforms, I do not find myself thinking about it at all or wanting to go on there or anything. And I do feel like, you know, my brain is clearer. I'm less depressed. I'm like, you know, more productive, all of those things. So, yeah.
It's hard, right? It's hard when you've kind of not defined yourself by this thing, but you work so hard on something that is so big and for better or worse, you can use the word existential or all-encompassing, whatever it might be, to at least I wrestle with sometimes justifying taking a step back, especially when I was born into such a preposterous position of privilege, and I live it every single day, to say, like, who am I to, like, take my foot off the pedal when everybody else doesn't have most of these things? Like, the least I can do is everything I can do all the time. And then I get talks from, like, my best friend. We were sitting around a little fire pit one night a couple months ago, and he was like, so where do your friends fit into your life these days? And it's like, oh, okay, got it.
But, like, think about it this way. You use the analogy of foot on the pedal. Imagine driving when you're dead asleep.
That's right.
Like, you're not going to take us anywhere good. So you should take that step back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you're you end up actually being more impactful when you're rested and you're clear-headed and you've had exercise and stuff like that. And it's balance, I guess. Well, thank you guys for sharing that. Last one. A book you've read this year, as much as we're all behind on books, that's opened to your mind to a topic you hadn't considered before, an angle you hadn't considered before, or has actually changed your thinking in some way. And we've got a whole list on Bookshop for all our guests. Good stuff. I
have bought a lot of books that I believe will do that. But one book that I am in the process of reading right now is Antonia Ujas's, she wrote a book on the BP oil spill, and, like, it's a great name. I think it's called Black Tide.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, she was on, it's called Black Tide. She was on Hot Take recently. And there's a lot about the BP oil spill that I didn't know, that I've learned from this book. But my favorite thing is that she has, like, a whole chapter on the misinformation and also how Gulf Coast residents, like, fought back against it with, like, they just trolled the living shit out of BP, and I love it. Like, awesome. They came up with all sorts of, like, phony Twitter handles impersonating them.
So good.
So, like, I did not create green trolling.
Sure.
I just brought it back. Billboards all over the city, like, tattoo artists got in on it, on graffiti. It was just, like, it was beautiful. And I loved reading those stories.
That's so
I love that. But that's, like, such a specific example of this thing of, like, your people, like, your community can come from something devastating, but goddamn, it can feel so good to be part of something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. My answer to this question is completely weird and unique to me, because the only books that I get time to read are ones that are related to my work. And they often tend to be, like, the crazy rantings of some, like, PR guy. So the one that I read most recently that, like, shifted my, or just, like, gave me new perspective onto it, was written by the VP of Public Affairs for Mobil Oil back in, like, the 80s. His name was Herb Schmertz, and it was called Goodbye to the Low Profile. And it is a guide to PR for industry, not just fossil fuel industry, but corporations in general. And it is such an incredible window into how they think about the media, how they think about the public, and, like, this very, very cynical way that, sort of corporate PR in general tries to shift the information that we all get to really, like, shape information in a way that leads to policies that are favorable to them. It was quite good.
That's wild. That's so specific, but I'm 100% into it.
It has this really cheesy photo of him on the cover too. And it includes this vignette that he tells to be like, oh, aren't journalists so awful? But that I was like, oh my God, why aren't more people doing that today? Because he talks about this, like, meeting that he had with the Wall Street Journal, where he was going in there to really, like, give them hell for not presenting Mobil's point of view enough in their coverage, and for being too biased against the industry and whatever else. And the guy who was the executive editor of the Wall Street Journal at the time, a guy named Fred Taylor, told, like, Herb Schmertz is like, I only got to my first bullet point, and then Frederick Taylor said, everything you're saying is bullshit, and stormed out of the room. And I was like, fuck yeah, that guy. Like, yes. So yeah, I don't know. I was like, this is great. Reminds me of, like, all the reasons that journalists should absolutely never, ever agree to the both sidesing of issues, because that is 100% being driven by corporate agendas. Yeah. So there you go.
That's amazing.
Little window into my life.
I didn't hear anything after Herb Schmertz, frankly. That's
such
amazing.
a good name.
I love that. That's fantastic. We'll throw those guys in the show notes and on Bookshop. You guys got to get out of here.
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for putting up with my rambling and my questions, and most importantly, all of the work that
Thank you for having us.
No, of course. I'm so inspired and motivated by both sides of what you folks do, but also what you do together. It's so powerful, and I think the movement, as if we can call it that, this conglomeration of very varied interests and requirements and needs and people who have been marginalized and affected by this thing can find a lot of value in what you guys do. So
thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks to our incredible guest today, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. We hope this episode has made your commute or awesome workout or dishwashing or fucking dog walking late at night that much more pleasant. As a reminder, please subscribe to our free email newsletter at importantnotimportant.com. It is all the news most vital to our survival as a species.
And you can follow us all over the internet. You can find us on Twitter at importantnotimp.
Just
so weird. Also on Facebook and Instagram at Important Not Important. Pinterest and Tumblr, the same thing. So check us out, follow us, share us, like us. You know the deal. And please subscribe to our show wherever you listen to things like this. And if you're really fucking awesome, rate us on Apple Podcasts. Keep the lights on. Thanks.
Please.
And you can find the show notes from today right in your little podcast player and at our website, importantnotimportant.com.
Thanks to the very awesome Tim Blaine for our jammin' music, to all of you for listening, and finally, most importantly, to our moms for making us. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.